I can read your resume. I already know you're damn smart. I know you got all these degrees. I know all the things you do. It don't impress me. I want to know you. I want to know you. I want to know your soul
Yes.
because that's what's going to inspire me, because that's what's going to speak to my heart. There's two other words that are essential to creating that belonging, which is trust and safety. Well, maybe there's something wrong with me because everyone around me is really smart and capable and, supposed to be well esteemed. And maybe I just don't have the skill sets to deal with my own emotions and just man up and thicken my skin. So right before, I started my second year of law school, I found myself on the ledge of my 18th floor window about to jump off, and for me, the story is that I actually jumped. But somehow, and I call this, a moment of grace, instead of falling forward, I fell backwards into my apartment. And
Mm.
within seconds, I saw the gravity of what I was doing. But all I could do was rush to my phone and call someone who lived really far away from me, but she happened to be walking on my block. So if you know New York City geography, I was in Midtown. She lived in Harlem, but she
Wow.
happened to be, walking in Midtown for whatever reason. And this is the thing, the synchronicity of the universe. She showed up in my apartment. We talked for several hours. And the next morning, I started my own breaking bias journey.
Next job that he absolutely has to have is leader of the free world, because we need the kind of vision and love and brilliance that he is speaking forth into just humanity. Today, we're going to be talking about his journey as a storyteller. We're definitely going to be getting into where he started in India as an immigrant, moving to the United States, and basically like remaking us human beings. Like, this is a dude who is using science to break bias, which is a very old human trait. But the way that Anu gets into our brains about the possibilities for us, right? How we imagine a world. Like, I want you to just do this exercise with me and we're going to get into it. But I just want you to think about, like, what would it be like if you lived
Mm.
in a world where you belonged? If you lived in a world where you weren't doubting nothing, nobody, like everybody was just like, I'm here and I belong here. Like, what would
That's right.
that be? Okay, because that's basically the audacity that Anu is bringing to this conversation and to life overall. So Anu, welcome. You're listening to Madam Speaker Says, your no fluff cheat code to becoming the voice everyone listens to. I'm your host, Machochodi. If you've been waiting for permission slip to straighten your crown and take up space like you invented the blueprint, Madam Speaker Says got you covered. No whispers, no apologies, just you, me, and some bold ass moves. Let's get into it. Welcome, everybody. I am your host, Machochodi, and I'm so delighted today to be joined by one of my absolute dearest and most beautiful human beings, who is literally all of the things. Like, Anu is one of these folks who's done everything. He's pretty much had every job in the world.
Not.
And the next job that he absolutely has to have is leader of the free world, because we need the kind of vision and love and brilliance that he is speaking forth into just humanity. Today, we're going to be talking about his journey as a storyteller. We're definitely going to be getting into where he started in India as an immigrant, moving to the United States, and basically like remaking us human beings. Like, this is a dude who is using science to break bias, which is a very old human trait. But the way that Anu gets into our brains about the possibilities for us, right? How we imagine a world. Like, I want you to just do this exercise with me and we're going to get into it. But I just want you to think about, like, what would it be like if you lived
Mm.
in a world where you belonged? If you lived in a world where you weren't doubting nothing, nobody, like everybody was just like, I'm here and I belong here. Like, what
That's
would that
right.
be? Okay, because that's basically the audacity that Anu is bringing to this conversation and to life overall. So Anu, welcome.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's such a delight. And I love that we're starting off there because that's one of the questions I ask in my book. It's like, how would you feel in a world without bias? And oftentimes people are like confused. I don't even know. And I'm like, wait, can we give ourselves the permission to imagine a world without bias? Because there are people out there who are imagining colonizing Mars, and they are going to put all the resources and talents and gifts and all sorts of other things to making that happen. So just as, where our mind goes, our energy flows. So
Mm,
if we just start with just giving ourselves that permission, how would I feel? Let's just start there. Not even, I don't have to know what the external world is
mm,
going to look like, but how would I feel?
mm.
And feel it, savor it. And that's how I feel like we can really begin to build communities and nation states and also families in our own bodies where we fully belong.
I love that. Oh my God. Like I said, the audacity, like to just dream that outsized and large. And I love that you bring Mars into it because it challenges where we are right now, right? Where we
Right.
are right now is a lot of pain. Where we are right now is people really feeling the pinch of division, feeling the hurt of they're not like us.
Right. That's
Kendrick
right.
Lamar. It's a wonderful song, but there's something deeper that's going on globally, and you're sitting in the United States, so the epicenter of, people who would lead us and have us believe that we're more different than we are the same.
Yeah.
Before we dive into some of the tools that can help people with that, we're going to get to that. I want to go all the way back. I want to go, like, let's go say hi to baby Anu. Can we please say hi?
Do it.
Hi, baby Anu. Like, so cute, of course. Tell me about where you grew up. Tell me specifically
Yeah.
about the town where you grew up. Tell me about the community. Tell me about what it felt like. Did you feel like you belonged to that place?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. I grew up in Old Delhi. So Old Delhi is a part of, the capital that is probably over 1,000 years old. There are buildings that are standing there from the Mughal era. They're 900 years old. I think the house we lived in itself was about 800 years old. So these were like really ancient places, continuously inhabited. And it's also one of the most diverse places in all of India. People of every ethnic group, every religious group, many gender groups. Like I grew up seeing third gender as part of our
Mhm.
communities.
Mm.
Also, the more than humans, the animal realms were everywhere. The cows,
Yeah.
monkeys,
More
all
than
sorts of
humans. I
birds.
love that.
Yeah, they all came and visited us. Like I
I love
remember,
that.
like we'd have to like hide our bananas or our groceries when we brought them home because if they were just lying out, a monkey would run in and just take them
Yes.
and run away with them. So I think I grew up in this like really wondrous idea. And this was also pre the liberalization of the Indian economy. So the economy
Mhm.
was relatively closed. So I grew up in a place where we didn't have plastic bags,
Mhm.
So like I didn't, that idea of plastic itself was very remote. And our day-to-day lives were really in in sync with the rhythms of the earth. There were lots of holidays, Holi just passed, it's a spring holiday. Very similarly, the summer equinox, the winter equinox, they were just holidays that marked community gatherings. And I also grew up in a joint family. So, of course, my parents were there, but our grandparents lived with us. We had relatives coming in and out. My parents were very busy. They're both doctors. They ran a nursing home. So I was raised primarily by my grandparents, but also there was just so much help. So it was like a whole village. So I think that's like one part of my, I think upbringing that's really vibrant and beautiful. But on the other hand, there was also a lot of trauma that I grew up with,
Mhm.
and it's not just trauma. I feel like it's the trauma that I've received from my family, but a lot of it's intergenerational, it's ancestral, it's historical. When
Mhm.
I was 7 years old, there were massive riots in the place where I grew up in Chandni Chowk between Hindus and Muslims.
Mhm.
Like we were on curfew, we couldn't leave our homes. And as a young person, I just had to bear witness to all this, these ethnic rivalry, these religious rivalries, as well as just the impact of colonialism. At
Mhm.
home, we spoke Hindi, and I loved Hindi. It's just such a sweet, sweet language. But when I went to school, all my subjects were in English, like
Mhm.
everything. So like it was so confusing at times. And I was like, why am I learning English? And when I looked at the outside world, it's like, oh, it's the language of commerce. So
Mhm.
if you wanted to make anything of yourself in this country, you had to speak English. When 90% of Indians do not speak English or read English,
Mhm.
things have changed since then. So I began to see that there are some really weird hierarchies that are operating in our society. And anyone who didn't speak English was considered illiterate,
Mhm.
somehow dumb, stupid, and not good enough. And these are really deeply internalized stories that I saw in my own grandmother, who basically was married off when she was in the fifth grade.
Mm.
And as a result, I would just hear her make these comments about herself and other people making comments to her when she was one of the wisest people I knew and taught me so much
Mhm.
about life and
Mhm.
being a good person.
Yeah.
I feel like those are kind of the dichotomies that coexisted, right?
Yeah. Oh my God.
Battling with as a child.
This picture is so vibrant. I can see you in this,
So,
family compound with all different relatives, the more than animals running in and out.
yes.
See little Anu trying to hide his banana from the
Oh
monkey.
my gosh.
And I resonate so deeply. I mean, there's so much that is parallel. You know that I'm South African, and you know probably that South Africa had a similar thing. I was educated in English, and at home we spoke a different language. My grandmother also could not speak anything other than her own language, Sepedi, and she was described as anything except for intellectual, as anything except for capable of the moons and the stars. And yet, this is the person who knew how to read the moons and the stars in a way that nobody else in my cosmos or life could, right? And
Right.
what I'm curious about for you is let's take a leap. Let's just let people know that then you immigrate to the United States. How old were you when you came to the States?
I was 10.
You're 10 years old. What a beautiful, like such a formative age. And the question that I have for you is exactly teasing out the thing that you said, the stories that surrounded you, right?
Right.
And stories that we tell ourselves about who we are. It's so beautiful to be grounded with you in this space. But now I want to understand, how does the story evolve as your story moves on to a completely different climate, different country, different everything? What are the
Yeah.
stories you begin to tell yourself that are different from the stories that you'd had in India?
It's such a beautiful question because the stories that I encountered after moving here were very different from the stories I was familiar with. And a lot of the stories that I heard were about me and people that looked like me. So
Mm.
when I first, my family, I grew up vegetarian. So they were vegetarian. So a lot of us, and about 40% of Indians are vegetarian. But when I moved over and folks found out I was from India,
And
people thought
sorry, just ground us, moved over exactly to where?
to New York City, actually. But I was in the Immigrant-ville that's known as Flushing, New York, um, 90s. And one of my classmates thought that we ate monkey brains
Mm.
because he had watched one movie, Indiana Jones,
Wow.
Temple of the Doom. And in that movie, the villain
Wow.
ate monkey brains. And that was his conception of how every Indian person in the
Wow.
world existed. And I don't want to blame him for it, but basically his imagination was limited by that one story. And there
Mm.
were no other models for him other than Apu, possibly on The Simpsons,
Mm.
that
Mm.
basically helped him see the humanity of people that just looked like me or came from the region where I'm from. And for me, that's where I began to not just encounter, but start battling these lies about myself. And it began at that age. And what it did to me is, as someone who was really proud, and not just proud, I was just a little kid who just loved life and all aspects of life, and I loved cultures, but I started hiding parts of myself.
Mm.
People thought that, my family is Hindu, so the pantheon of Hindu gods are all, pagan religious artifacts, and therefore we would go to hell. I would have classmates that would give me pamphlets of, basically Christian propaganda, hard right, that would portray a lot of the cultural aspects of um, Indians and Indian religions as demonic, and
Mhm.
how they all found this one version of Christ. And I was like, wow, like what are these stories? And in my head, I'm like, this is a lie. This is not what it is. Like basically it's different representations of the same one divine. And I would
Mhm.
try to explain to them like what I knew. And of course, have you ever met a bully who wanted to fact check their,
It's like, wait a minute, let me sit down and take notes as you explain.
right, exactly. So I think for me, that's where I started becoming small. And I started hiding parts
Mm.
of myself. And I started
Mm.
having a crisis of identity. This
Mm.
is what a lot of immigrants have, a lot of people that are growing up between cultures have, because they're battling these stories within their minds about who they think they are and who the external world thinks they are. And for me, that, just continued to get worse because as I became a teenager, 9/11 happened in New York City. And of course, it was an awful, atrocious event. But then I started to people, I looked like Osama bin Laden. So there was this new like storytelling, myth making about my humanity, which had very little to do with me. But the interesting thing about that story was that not only was I experiencing this with the external world, Americans in general, but also I was experiencing this form of Islamophobia within the home
Mm-hmm.
because of the
Mm-hmm.
historical tensions between Hindus and Muslims within the South
Mm-hmm.
Asian context. And I was like, what is going on, right? So for me, I think going to college and discovering international relations, studying history, Middle Eastern Islamic studies was a way to begin to understand post-colonial studies. Where do these stories come from? And do I really believe them? Because, I came from a place where I believed the adults around me. I respected my elders. We
Mm-hmm.
trusted what's written in
Yes.
books. But oftentimes I would read the books and I'm like, this is incorrect. And no one told me that books can be incorrect. So I wanted to like discover, well, where do these stories come from? And how is it that I feel bad about myself? And am I actually inferior as people tell me that I am? So
Mm.
that's kind of the journey that I've started going on.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think it resonates with just about every human being at different levels,
Right.
right? I mean, your story is your own, but the part that just rings so true in my head is where you talk about a crisis of identity. Because I think
Right.
almost anybody who's listening to this has had their own version of a crisis of identity. And no, we're not necessarily 10 years old today, right? So people who are listening in on this conversation, they are grown women. And what I'm really curious about is words that you used to describe feeling small and also this feeling of, wait a minute, like I don't necessarily see myself reflected back in what is being projected, both about me, but then also maybe there's parts of me that shouldn't be here, that I am supposed to be hiding. And let me make this real when I'm talking about. A couple weeks ago, I had a video here go viral, and the video shares a little bit about my personal story, right? The things that I've lived through, including me acknowledging my ancestors. And I thought it was so fascinating because one of the comments that came at me was, oh my God, this was amazing. I was with you listening all 7 minutes until you started talking about ancestors. Then I just dropped off because, wow, demons. That's
Wow.
I'm paraphrasing, but that's what was in the comments of this person. And this person, from their name, it sounds as though there's somebody who's African, right?
Um,
And it made me so curious about this person's experience, but it also, to this conversation, it makes me very curious about this thing that we become expert at doing, which is
that's right.
parts of ourselves.
That's right.
Tell me more about that. Tell me more about what does that feel like? Tell
That's
me
right.
more about, as an adult, what it means to embody a section of
That's right.
yourself. And the other sections, you're like, nope, can't bring this out today. Nope, this is staying home.
That's
Nope,
right.
only allowed to come out in this particular company. And when I go to work, I need to check myself because most of me is not allowed to come. The only parts of me that come to work is this, like my armor, nothing else.
Right. That's
My
right.
gear goes to work with me. So tell me more about, and especially as an adult, because you spoke about it as a 10-year-old, but I think it's,
Yeah.
and then that's another thing that's very interesting. Sometimes it is the 10-year-old who shows up, right?
Exactly. He's still kind of sometimes driving the car.
Yeah.
To me, this is really interesting because for me, it came like what I call this process of limiting oneself is process of colonization of our own heart minds.
Hmm.
Neurocolonization. So at the neural network, our nervous system gets colonized by those stories. And for me, after college, that meant running away from the US and wanting to find communities where I felt like I belonged and seen. And that took me to Asia. I went to South Korea. I lived in the UK. But eventually I came back to the US because I cared about human rights. I wanted to become an international human rights lawyer and found myself in law school. And of course, in law school, we're learning all this legislation, all these, principles of international norms that protect human beings. Yet there was no capacity for us to actually hold stories, these same stories, particularly for me, stories of experiencing marginalization and exclusion and bias.
Hmm.
And
Mhm.
when our class, our professors, our teachers, our administrators don't have those capacities, our classmates don't have those capacities, I started internalizing them. I was like, well, maybe there's something wrong with me because everyone around me is really smart and capable and, supposed to be well esteemed. And maybe I just don't have the skill sets to deal with my own emotions and just man up and thicken my skin. So right before, I started my second year of law school, I found myself on the ledge of my 18th floor window about to jump off, and for me, the story is that I actually jumped. But somehow, and I call this, a moment of grace, instead of falling forward, I fell backwards into my apartment. And
Mm.
within seconds, I saw the gravity of what I was doing. But all I could do was rush to my phone and call someone who lived really far away from me, but she happened to be walking on my block. So if you know New York City geography, I was in Midtown. She lived in Harlem, but she
Wow.
happened to be, walking in Midtown for whatever reason. And this is the thing, the synchronicity of the universe. She showed up in my apartment. We talked for several hours, and the next morning I started my own breaking bias journey. And what
Mm.
was happening was this was the battle of stories in my mind. I had started believing the lies that people were
Mm.
telling about me and the identities I held and the people I came from, about my ancestors. And for me, that is the work of breaking bias, the work of neuro decolonization. And really, it's a work of shifting our consciousness from where it's been for the past several centuries to where it can be in the future. One thing you and I share is our love for A New Earth by Eckhart Tolle.
Yes. Yeah.
And one of the most provocative things he wrote, and I read the book and probably in the early 2010s and have read it like many, many times since, is that on the whole, human consciousness is evolving towards the good. It's
Hmm.
evolving for the better. And I kept on asking myself, is that true? Is that true? Is that true? And it just didn't feel right to me because of everything we've experienced around political instability, economic instability, polarization. But then I went back to my ancestors and my ancestral wisdom. And, particularly in the Buddhist and the Hindu lineages, but also in the indigenous lineages of the United States, the African animist lineages, this whole idea of Ubuntu. It's like, wait, they've been saying the same thing. All the ancestors, all the black and brown people around the world, who
Oh,
are
we've
still,
been known, honey. We've been known.
yeah. Oh, wait, they've been saying this too. Uh, so I was like, well, there's something here. And that's where kind of my journey around breaking bias and really healing and embodying into the fullness of who I am really began. That was that fateful evening in
Yeah.
2009.
In 2009, how old were you?
I was 23.
23.
Yeah, it was a few days before my 24th birthday. So,
Wow. You were a
yeah.
baby.
Yeah, I mean, but according to the US, I was a grown-ass man too at the same time.
A grown-ass baby man.
Grown-ass baby man. But that's the thing. I feel like what's happening in our society is there are a lot of men who are acting like they're still babies that are running our world. And that's, one of the things we have to help ourselves mature out of because of those wounded kids, those wounded toddlers, those wounded teenagers. And it's really true around this idea of toxic masculinity that comes out, of course, in male identified bodies, but in all of us that prevent us from being our full selves, feel, that fuel the need to hide parts of ourselves and have the sense of imposter syndrome all the time.
Mm, mm, mm. Yeah, that resonates. That really, really resonates, right? I think part of the pain that we're living through as a society, as a collective,
Yeah,
is people not being able to show their full humanity because
yeah,
it hurts.
it
It
hurts.
it
Yeah,
hurts. And
yeah,
instead of facing the fear and the pain, they'd rather lash out at the rest of us in anger, right? It's like anger is the acceptable emotion.
that's
Um,
right.
I want to pedal back just a micro little bit and talk about that moment when you're 23 years old and the seismic thing has happened to you, right? And you've made a decision as well. both the universe decided for you because you backwards, not forwards, but then something inside of you clicked and you picked up the phone and called a friend, right?
Yeah,
And you then decide to tell a different kind of story from the stories that you had been living. I want to talk about that inflection point moment. What is it? What does it take to stand up and to begin sharing a different kind of story or any story at all that is truthful? Because the other thing that I think is true here, and this is the point where you as a storyteller is really fascinating to me. It is so fucking hard to tell the truth and to tell the truth in public where you're not waiting for what are people going to say? What does it
yeah,
mean that I'm out here sharing so publicly something that's so intimate that can be a source of shame, right? That can be a source of vulnerability, even if it's not shame. How do you muster up what it takes, especially as a man, especially as a man
yeah,
who's been masculinated, like you've
yeah,
up in this world that is like, you better be macho, you better be strong, like man up. So where does that, what does it take to
yeah,
begin finding your voice to speak up and tell the truth in
yeah.
moments when it's hard?
I think this is where I rely on my spiritual practices. So I think one thing that's been a huge part of my identity that I had to hide, once I moved to the US is spirituality. From a very young age, I was just attracted to spirit. And for me, the idea of spirit is just so expansive. You call it the universe, you call it God, you call it Buddha nature, what have you. But is that something, there's something that's bigger than me that connects us all. The Zulu notion is Ubuntu, which I feel like I'm a part of. Like I am because you are, and you are because of I am, and we are interconnected and we're siblings. Um, and I think that's something that always motivated me, that sense of Ubuntu, that sense of interbeing with all of nature. And I think that's what the external world tried to grade out of me. And it's when I see the external world, it's not like any one human, it's the systems and cultures that we have inherited from colonialism and from capitalism in particular, and a very like divisive form of capitalism that's very extractive and dominating to the
Mhm.
spirit itself. So I
Mhm.
think for me, what that moment did was really return to spirit because I had forgotten. I had become a consumer of intellectual information. I was incredibly cerebral. I was in my head all the time. And of course, I was in law school. So we were just in our heads all the time.
And
So,
celebrated for that too,
and
right?
celebrate and
I
rewarded
think
for
that's
that.
so important to call
Yeah,
out. You and I, we know each other
that's
because we
right.
were celebrated in these circles for
Yeah.
our intellect, for how smart we were, quote unquote, 4.0
Yeah.
kids.
That's right. And we're able to make these arguments, right? And we're able to convince others of our arguments,
Yes,
but it's completely cut off from everything that's neck below.
yes, yes.
And returning to our ancestors, I think about my grandma, I think about people in my, biological line. I'm like, they're all like embodied humans. We practiced yoga. Why? Because that's where you begin. So you can, basically inhabit the fullness of this body from
Mm,
every fingertip to every toe tip, every part of your body fully inhabited and fully known. And I think for me, that's where the journey began, was to return to my ancestral practices. So in law school, I became a certified yoga teacher, and
mm,
a whole lot of coincidences that led me there. But, I just started believing in the universe, just lead me, started trusting it. And if people didn't want to hear what I had to share, I wouldn't share it with them. I'd be very discerning around who I
mm.
share my story with. Like the way I'm sharing with you, I wouldn't share on a Dan Harris podcast because it's a different audience, it's a different type of person who wants to hear these types of stories. But for me, it was no longer about the external person, but to be fully authentically me. But also think about the impact I could be having through stories themselves. Because I myself began to, build the courage to share my story after
Mhm.
hearing other people's stories.
Mm.
Like, how many times I've listened to Ian Van Zandt or Brene Brown or all
Yes,
Oprah Super Soul Sunday series,
yes.
and it was people sharing some really intimate stories about,
Yeah.
their trials and tribulations. I remember I was at a human rights conference. It was hosted by UNESCO in 2012, and it was for, human rights lawyers and activists from around the world. And there was a incredibly beautiful human there, China, who was from Denmark, but She basically escaped to Denmark as a refugee as a former child soldier from Uganda. She was abducted at 5 and, of course, went through a whole lot of atrocities until somehow she found herself in Denmark and got the help to heal. And to all of us human rights people, we're talking about all these awful things that are happening around the world and fighting for it. And she just said one thing to us, you know, there's one thing that you all have that doesn't cost anything, which is to smile
Mm,
and to practice that smile on your face as much as you can. And
mm,
if you can't, think of all the children in, Uganda, where I came from, who can't smile. So smile for them. And when she said that to me, I was like, whoa, right? Of course, I've been through stuff, and there's no comparison, there's no oppression Olympics here. But that gave me strength and that gave me hope. That's like, wow, like there's something about the human spirit here. Like what she's sharing with me and with this, room full of human rights advocates from around the world is, a reminder around the big picture of where we're headed.
yeah.
Dr. King often talks about our goal is to build a beloved community, and
Mm,
this will require qualitative shifts in our souls and quantitative shifts in our lives. And for me, it's like, whoa, like those are the quantitative and qualitative shifts we need to make.
mm,
And he used a very similar word to Ubuntu, which is agape,
mm,
from his Christian terminology, which is radical love, radical empathy.
mm.
Um, so yeah, anyway.
Yeah, resonates so deeply with my
Yeah.
soul, literally. And it speaks so much to this power that I see in your work, right? I think one of the things that attracts me the most to what you're doing and the book, Breaking Bias, the tools that you break down, is how deeply and seamlessly you weave in the spirituality to this work that's about breaking bias. We're going to get to that in a moment because I think it's really important to give people the toolkit, the tool
Yeah.
and the toolkit that we promised, especially for the times that we're living in. But
Yeah.
just one quick rewind there, because I am interested in you as a storyteller. And again, where did you get the gumption to stand up in front of, I mean, I know that you've given
Yeah.
talks, you facilitated groups at Google, you facilitated groups at some of the most quote unquote impressive big corporations around the world, and not just corporations, organizations. You've served something like more than 300 organizations. We're talking about thousands of motherfuckers, okay? And you guys are sitting over there meditating, doing all
That's
kinds of
right.
like high-minded shit. And what I really want to know is how, from a storytelling lens, did
Yeah.
you get it in your wisdom? And I mean, I think I understand how, but I want to hear you talk about it to stand up and again, as a speaker, as a storyteller, to say, actually, I'm going to do something that might make you a little bit uncomfortable. Okay. I see you in your C-suite, but we're
Yeah.
going to go there. We're going to embody. You use that word. And
That's
I
right.
love it when you actually explained what embody is through the example of your grandparents, your aunts, uncles, everybody in the family home sitting and doing yoga together and like feeling their 10 toes and feeling their bodies breathe, and everybody is doing it in unison. That is what it means to embody. So again, let me ask it again, or let me just clarify. What I want to know is, from a storyteller's perspective,
Yeah.
what was it for you to bring these two seemingly disparate things together?
Such a beautiful question. And it's the first time I'm reflecting on this and I think what's come for me is that,
Hey, pull up. Just you and me for a second. Are you an exec, a founder, or an entrepreneur who's sick of shrinking in rooms you're overqualified to lead? It's time to stop playing small and start owning your expertise. But how, Machochodi? Girl, I got you. I offer coaching that helps women of color just like you to claim your place as a thought leader. Whether you want to command a room, craft and share your signature story, or finally get that book out of your head and onto bookshelves, I've got the strategy and spicy accountability that you need. If you're tired of seeing less qualified folks shine while you stay behind the scenes, girl, the wait list is open. Follow the link in show notes to stop waiting for permission and claim your VIP spot now. My mission? Helping women just like you to snatch the spotlight, shake the table, and take your damn seat at the top already. No begging, no detours, and nope, no apologies. Just bold ass moves.
After I graduated law school, I had the fortune of meeting someone, Raw Goddess. I went to she was doing a mastermind in the city at the time, 2011. And I was just really deeply touched. And I was like, I want to work with you and I want you to help me, build this idea that has been just driving me insane. Like it just needs to come out of me, which was that we can live in a world without bias. We can live in a world without racism, without sexism, without homophobia, and all sorts of isms and phobia out there. It may sound crazy, but I need your help. And she was like, okay, right on. And we started working together.
We love to believe that this can be a thing.
Yeah, right. This is 2011. This is pre-Black Lives Matter. This is pre-Me Too. And I'm like this nerdy Indian kid, right? Just fresh out of law school. And so the more I worked with her, the more she saw how much in my head I was. So of course I was doing my practices. I was, doing, practicing a lot of the healing technologies I talk about in the book. But I was still in my head. So she would host these quarterly events around the country, oftentimes in New York. She was still based in New York at the time. And in 2020, she's like, we need to get you on the court. You're really good at talking to me on the phone, but we need to get you on the court. And I would say on the court, which basically means on stage.
Like play?
Yeah, on the court, like play. Yeah, like play ball. But play ball, I said, you need to start sharing your story. You need to start getting practice. And I think that was the first time where, of course, I was always used to asking questions in classroom settings.
Yes.
But I think she made that invitation of me. For her to be a Black woman asking this brown man and making that invitation, not as an invitation even, but as like an order.
You don't do this.
You don't do this. Like you ain't got no choice. You're gonna do this because you're my coachee and I already put you in the agenda. And I'm like, okay, I guess I'm gonna do it. And the first couple of times was really awkward. It was tough, right?
Why?
It was tough because I wasn't used to expressing myself so openly. And I could see how I was still hiding parts of myself on stage. And it was tough because somatically in my body, I wasn't used to being authentic. So as a result, I would see tension in my body. I would see tension in my throat. I wouldn't be able to share the fullness of my story. And I would be in my head about what others are thinking, as opposed to just sharing from the fullness and from the heart space where my stories are coming from.
And sorry, Anu, let's dig in a little bit more there. Yeah. What was the audience's feedback at that stage?
So the feedback was always
as you're experiencing this tension and this can't show all of my parts, only the professional part can show up. How's the audience? What's their take on that?
The audience was always like, I want to see more of your personal side. I can read your resume. I already know you're damn smart. I know you got all these degrees. I know all the things you do. It don't impress me. I want to know you. I want to know you. I want to know your soul.
Yes.
Because that's what's going to inspire me, because that's what's going to speak to my heart. And that was the feedback I kept on getting. And for me, I worked with her for a couple of years. This was practice and she was getting me ready, right? And I think for me to have a mentor, advisor, a coach, a friend who so deeply cared about me was so helpful. So that's why I'm a big fan of coaching, a big fan of having these type of mentor and advising relationships. But I think one has to be really discerning.
Yes, of course.
You have to be very discerning. And I think I was really blessed. Again, this is where the universe also plays a part, where my coach, also shared my values, around reimagining capitalism, around reimagining how we box each other in by these human-made identities, these hierarchies, and, as someone who comes from the intersectional lens of an identity that's super marginalized, she still walked around the earth as if she was a queen. Right. And that's noble.
Raw goddess. I mean, come on.
Raw goddess, right? Yeah, exactly. She named herself that.
Yeah.
So, and I think that's what's really unique, because I think it's for someone who's felt so oppressed or marginalized or excluded by social systems, whether you're Black or brown or indigenous or gay or trans or what have you. instead of seeking that validation from the external world, I think the lesson is that we give ourselves that permission to be that.
Yes. Yes.
And if that permission isn't there, it's because there's probably a lot of guck in the way.
Mm.
So it's time to pull out the broom. It's time to pull out the mop. It's time to pull out the vacuum cleaners. We got to clean up that guck.
Yeah.
So that, that runway is ready for you to walk on.
Yeah. And also to do what you did, right? To be brave, you just did it on this particular conversation, to be brave enough to say and to admit and to look inside and say that damaged story, that broken story from colonization, from all of the hurts, from intergenerational trauma. I internalized some of that at some point, and not through any fault of my own. I mean, I was just like busy being human, 10 years old and breathing on planet Earth. Like, what else? What else do
Amen.
you expect, right? And
Exactly.
so once you do that work and you allow more air into yourself and you allow more of you to show up, I want to know then, once you started showing up in these rooms as your fully embodied self and you gave yourself permission, like all of Anu, like we all
Yeah.
in this room.
You're all going in there.
All of us, 10-year-olds, all of you, 23-year-olds, we're
Uh,
all going.
that's right.
How did your storytelling shift, both for you, but also the impact of the work?
I think it just became more and more authentic
Mm,
and a lot easier, because I no longer was in my head about what I think others are wanting to hear, but what I
mm,
authentically want to share. And then one thing I'll share about, particularly the person who commented on one of your videos, who just kind of, when she heard the words,
and
when they ancestors, it was like, oh my gosh. I think this is some of the work that, Black and brown people in particular have to do in this century, which is
Mhm.
to, I think we have colonized ourselves
Of course.
by we have taken on the stories of the colonizers about who our ancestors were. And
Yeah.
as a result, we have actually abandoned our ancestors. We've abandoned our cultures. And that is causing a major identity crisis in so many of us because we don't know who we are. We're no longer connected to the land. We're no longer connected to our ancestral lines. And I think for me, not just I think for me, my lived experience was to begin to acknowledge my ancestors, was to begin to thank them,
Mhm.
begin to bring them in my daily prayers, in my, you know, even when I would talk, I'm like, okay, uncle, you're here. Thank you so much for being here. Like little things like that. I don't know what it does, and I think the neuroscience around this is being studied. But my sense is what it's doing is it's that it's moving our attention from all the negativity that is fed all the time towards possibility, towards positive mental and emotional states. Because when we think of our ancestors, particularly if we don't know them, we think of them warmly. We think, oh, these were people that lived, that survived, that were resilient. And I think that we kind of gain strength from that in a very intangible way.
And tangible. It's both
Yeah,
intangible and intangible. And I can
that's right.
tell you this, I can tell you this for myself from my lineage, speaking with and being in dialogue daily with my ancestors is the practice of presence. And the practice of presence is allowing me here in this human body to remember and always be connected to my eternity. I'm not just this beautiful thing that you see on the screen.
That's right.
That's literally just the screen filter.
Right.
There is so much happening all the time. And the connection point to you being 23 years old on the 18th floor and about to do this huge thing, right? Once you become aware of those ancestors, you hear them, you see them catching you in real time. That's the tangible part. So it's
Yeah.
not something that's like woo-woo way out there. It
Yeah.
is here now in the flesh. It is this flesh is born of flesh that has always, like we've been, that is spirit that has always been here and will always be here. I'm in Oaxaca, and let me tell you, this is one of the most spiritual, alive
Right.
places. You go to Monte Alban and you're like, I cannot believe I'm standing in what, 4,000 years of continuous Zapotec history. What the heck?
Right. Well, can I share something with you? I don't think I've shared this publicly
Please.
yet, but this is another story around ancestors because I think you invoked him and he came to me. So, I grew up, of course, in this household, and one thing that even in India when I was growing up, there was like a there was like a tinge of sadness that kind of surrounded my family, and I never understood what it was until a couple of years ago. So my dad, my father, had an older brother who had died
Mm,
before he was married, before I was born, before my dad was married, so before any of my siblings were even around in the 70s.
mm,
And we kind of knew about it, but no one ever talked about it in the family. It was like a big family secret, it's like a super, super pain point.
mm,
So something a couple of years ago was just like his presence was just in my meditations and my yoga. Like I was just needing to know about this human.
mm.
So I started doing some digging, some family excavation.
Uh-oh.
And no, but and this is beautiful because when you said that your ancestors are catching you, I'm like, he has been there.
Mhm.
I don't have scientific evidence, but I have my felt sense experience and
Yes.
stories I've learned about him. And
Yeah.
this kind of goes to intergenerational trauma, which is so pervasive in our communities as well.
Mm.
So the more I excavated, I learned that he died by suicide. He
Mm.
died by suicide a couple of years before my dad was married. And he died by suicide because he had an argument with my grandmother, whom I loved, who wanted to get him married to a woman.
Mm.
And
Wow.
he was gay.
Wow.
He was gay in India in the 1970s. He
Mm.
was not out. The culture was completely not acceptable around, homosexuality. I didn't even know what the word gay was until I came to the US. I'm gay, by the way, for any of the viewers who don't know. And that was going to be my fate in 2009. And that's kind of the story, right? So for me, I'm like, oh my gosh, he is one ancestor. I didn't even know he existed at
Wow.
that time, but
Wow.
he's been
At
protecting me.
23 when you were,
Yeah, yeah. But
yeah.
so I was going to repeat that cycle.
Yeah. But he knew you existed. That's
Yeah,
the,
exactly.
and not
That's the,
only did he know that you existed, he caught you and was you.
yeah, exactly. So it's like we are the blessing of our ancestors. Whether we know them or not, they're there. And I think for me, this is kind of the point around interbeing, around Ubuntu, is that I'm also an ancestor. Whether
Mm.
I give birth biologically or not, I
Mm.
am continuing on beyond this body after all of our common destination, which is death.
Right. Right.
Newsflash to anyone who doesn't believe that.
Breaking
But
news.
breaking news, but not just for 7 generations or 700 generations ahead. I
Mm.
think that's kind of the type of deep time we need to be thinking about because the struggles, particularly those of us who share our bodies, have been that long.
Yeah.
If you're a woman, if you're a Black person or a brown person or indigenous person or trans person, but we had ancestors, who planted those seeds 700 years ago
Right.
for us to be here together today.
Wow, Anu. Thank you so much for bringing your uncle into
Thank you.
the
Yeah.
conversation and honoring us with his presence and your
Yeah, thank you for invoking that. And I've never shared this publicly, again, out of fear that, oh my God, I'm going to be perceived as too woo or too crazy or that. But I'm like, I don't care anymore. It just felt like it's relevant to this conversation.
Yes.
And this ancestor wants to be seen,
Yes.
you know?
Yes. As we all do. That's the other thing.
Yes,
Our
yes.
ancestors are like, are you kidding me? Do you see this divinity and you're just gonna
Right.
hide me?
Look what I've done for you, right? All that I've done for you, and you ain't going to appreciate it. I'm like, okay, okay,
Some
okay.
respect.
That's right.
That's actually not for nothing. In my culture, we know there's certain illnesses, there's certain ways in which the ancestors will speak to you by breaking you down because you refuse to see me. So the only way I can get to you is let me make you still. Let me make this body come to a standstill, right? And then you'll ask for help. And the help is you really need to pay attention to your ancestors because you acting like they aren't here, like trying to do everything for you, you know?
Right. That's
On
right.
that note of offering medicine,
Yeah.
we promised folks who are living through one of the most intense political times of our lifetime. What is the balm what are some of the tools that come out of breaking bias that you're living through also in real time? I mean, I want to call out breaking bias came out September 2024. Am I
That's
correct?
right. Yeah.
We're recording this in the spring of 2025. I mean, the level of earthquakeness that has happened politically
Yeah.
in the United States and throughout the whole global north and beyond, and the
Yeah.
ramifications in people's everyday lives. We're talking about human beings not having access to basic things like HIV antiretroviral drugs, right? In places like South Africa, where I'm from, all over the continent, Nigeria. I mean, you can tell me stories probably about what's happening in Asia where people are reeling. And then there's the just day-to-day struggle of how do I make it through? I mean, one of the things that I'm definitely feeling right now is I feel so bogged down anytime I listen to the news. I feel a level of isolation and I feel a level of evil is winning. And I don't believe that, but I feel it. I
That's
feel
right.
constant deluge of overwhelm. And you saw the United States diplomatic corps essentially attacking South Africa for various reasons. What do you do at an individual level to wade through? And this is a question
Yeah.
that is about what are some of the tools that are available to us that also, I mean, I want to point this out because I think this is so important. It's tools to
Yeah.
help us, but they're also the kind of tools that help us create that world that you dared to name, right? A world
Yeah.
without bias.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that and thank you for acknowledging it, right? And that's really the first tool, which is mindfulness, which is really about expansion of our awareness. And I think you actually modeled exactly what folks I invite everyone to do. You basically said, I know that it's not all doomsday out there. It has to be. There's 8.5 billion people on this earth, and I know everything isn't going to shits. We're still here. The fact that something's right, Zoom is connecting, and we're talking about it from two different countries. Um, and I think part of what you said is like, but whenever I read the news, I feel depleted.
Mm-hmm.
So really notice that. That's where we start. Really become mindful of, oh, how do I feel after I take certain actions?
Mm-hmm.
How do I feel in my body? What is the somatic experience of that? Is there heaviness on my chest? Is my, if I, am I like, what happens to me after I watch news, I get cloudy and confused, slurred speech. So begin to notice that. And then what we can do is actually not do those things.
Mm-hmm.
Part of the goal really with mindfulness and awareness is, of course, to notice our own experience, but also to become mindful of what these systems are. We're operating in an algorithmic paradigm,
Mm-hmm.
which is designed to grab our attention.
What does that mean? We're operating in an algorithmic, because I know what algorithm is for socials, right? But what
Yeah,
you said, what does that mean?
that is what it is. That's how the media cycle, the institution of media is actually designed right now. And in that institution, in these algorithms, because they've really hacked our biology,
Mm.
we know that
Mm.
lies laced with fear and anger spread faster than the truth.
Mm.
And regardless of how many times you try to fact check the truth, because the lies laced with fear and anger have triggered that primitive part of our brain, our nervous system, we are unwilling to change our opinions, our views. So that's what's driving the polarization around our world. So I think part of it is for us to actually trust the science. Maria Ressa, who is a Nobel Peace Prize laureate, is a journalist from the Philippines. She basically went through a dictatorship in the Philippines, continues to be. And she basically writes in her book all this stuff, how these social media companies are really manipulating our biology. So I think one of the first things we can do, particularly to this point, is actually we have to moderate our media consumption.
Mm.
It's not just essential, it's vital for our survival, our mental health. So for me, what I do is I actually have screen time for all my apps on my phone, and I follow it and respect it. And I actually try not to read the news. And if I want to read the news, I actually go to news outlets that are non-American, that are
Mm.
from the global, South, oftentimes because they don't follow those same incentive structures.
Give us examples, please. So somebody who's listening, and
Yeah,
like, what do I need to, where do I go? Because here's the thing too, right? I know you. You are so plugged into the world. You're
Yeah,
interested in the world and you care about the world and you want to
yeah,
affect good impact on the world. You can't do that without information. So a lot of
right.
people feel trapped. Every time I go and listen or try to watch or read even certain outlets in the global West, I feel all the things we've just described. And yet,
Yeah.
like, what am I going to do? Am I going to check out and become like a pumpkin and not care about the world and only worry about like my eyeshadow? And by the way, okay, my eyeshadow's on point all day.
Right. Ain't no shame about the outshadow. It's part about, I think this is exactly it. I'll give you some examples, of course, but it's about being mindful. So, like designating a time for that consumption. But if you go in the
Mhm.
bathroom, if you're walking on the street, you don't need to check the news.
That's
You know,
great.
if you're bored, notice that you're bored.
Great.
Make a list of all the things you need to do. Call your mom, call your partner, call someone else, right? So
Yeah.
it's really about beginning to check where our mind is going. And in those like empty moments during our day, let's not fill it up with all that negativity that's out there, right? But designate a time so we can be informed, so we can do something. So that's really the awareness practice. And the second practice is actually stereotype replacement, which is really about replacing the unwholesome with wholesome. So again, replacing those habits of, going to the news with, going to exercise or,
Mm.
taking 10 breaths together or calling your mom or whatever. But also if you really want to read something, you want to do something, go to a place that makes you happy, right? For me, that's been Yes Magazine as an example. It's the Sun Magazine. I read Tricycle, which is really around Buddhist wisdom. I listen to certain podcasts like the Wisdom Podcast or On Being, and Brene Brown's Unlocking Us. So there are all these other channels of like positive media that's really designed to help us grow. So I think part of it, again, it's really about habit building. So that's where how we can really build stereotype replacement. The other three practices are more than the mind. The third is individuation, which is really about cultivation of curiosity.
Mm.
And when it comes to, and we'll just stay with the media consumption example because it's so pervasive. I think curiosity is really about why is this person making this media? What's their objective? So even just being curious around that idea. And you'll realize with a lot of the mainstream news organization, the objective is for them to continue to want us to continue to come back to them.
Mm-hmm.
They can capture our eyeballs, they can capture our attention, which is good for ad revenue. So I think it's just like knowing that. And again, no judgment. They're just doing what they're designed to do, right? It's not about right or wrong, but is that wholesome for me? Is that skillful for me? So it's that curiosity that we bring when it comes to our human relations, really being curious about the person we're with versus our idea of them.
Mm-hmm.
We can actually practice this with ourselves. Oftentimes we've done something wrong in the past and we just hold on to that and we berate ourselves forever the rest of our lives. But really be curious, like, hey, who was I back then? Because I've evolved since then, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
really, offering that benefit of the doubt and extending that grace to ourselves. And the
Mm.
last two are really hard practices, which is pro-social behavior, which are really like a host of mental and emotional states that are positive. So active cultivation of compassion, of empathy, of joy, of playfulness, of forgiveness. Like these are hard qualities that all of our ancestors from across traditions have been raving about. Like this is what life is about. But
Mm.
instead of just like talking about like, hey, those t-shirts people wear, be kind,
Yeah.
instead of being an order, actually offering that to ourselves. Hey, like I'm gonna watch the way I speak to myself today. I'm going to add the word dear every time I refer to myself. Oh, how are you, dear? Or can I get this for you, dear? Like little ways of endearment. I had to do this work actually, 10, 15 years ago, because I began to notice that really critical part in my own head because I had internalized the way, I was being talked to around myself. So I had to shift that tone. So that's kind of pro-social behaviors. And lastly, it's perspective taking, the fifth tool, which is giving ourselves the permission to imagine what it's like to be in the shoes of another. And this is what really great actors do. You
Mm-hmm.
know, this is what a lot of creative agencies do when they do like user research. But this is what all of us have the capacity to do. And for me, the invitation for us would be imagine who you would be if you could accomplish your dreams? How would you feel, right? Or imagine who you were when something happened to you that still haunts you to this day. And can you heal yourself? This is where pro-social behaviors, curiosity, mindfulness, all of these tools can really help us heal and grow. And this is the capacity of our heart. Desmond Tutu, from your part of the world, often talked about compassion, you know, as the antidote of our time. And this is how we really kind of be the change we wish to be in the world. And we really start with ourselves.
Yeah.
In order for us to change the world, we have to really change ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah, you and I, oh my goodness, we are such twins around that.
Yeah.
A deep belief and investment in not navel gazing, but understanding the work that has to happen within in order to affect anything, even just breath out, going out. In order for breath to go out and affect something else in the world, right?
Yeah.
Like it
Right.
has to start with that oxygen that's coming in. I want to ask you a question that is about these tools and specifically zoning in on maybe the last 2 or 3 tools. I love cultivating curiosity, and I love the way that you describe it as a lens that we offer not only for folks out, but also in, and sometimes hindsight, right? I also love this opportunity to practice not a t-shirt, but a life, like a living and expansive heart that is full of empathy, that is practicing. And here's where the question is, because it is with the wrestling. It's not easy to practice these things always. And what I
Yeah.
want to know for you is, can you give us an example recently where you've had to put this stuff to practice that has challenged you, where it hasn't been easy, where you've really had to dig deep and say, "Oh man, do I really believe this?" Am
Oh,
I really like where you're really being put to the metal?
every day, every day. Because I'm human like y'all,
He's
same
like,
nervous system,
excuse
right?
me. He's
These
like, have you been to Earth?
Oh,
Hello?
yeah.
Have you heard of Earth? Gosh, right now.
Well, that's why it's about building new habits. One of the things that first came to me, I want to invoke another elder of our Black elders in the US, Ruby Sales, and she has this beautiful quote where she talks about, in order for us to have clear sight, we need hindsight,
Mm.
foresight, and insight.
Ooh, ooh,
I mean, not my
hello,
words, but I'm like, okay, I'll
come
take it, right? So
on.
that's clear sight. And I think for me, this is one of the things that's super essential to this practice. What I've found is contemplative practice
Mm.
to be essential to practice those 3 tools: individuation, pro-social behavior, perspective taking.
What is
For me, that's
contemplative practice?
any practice that helps us go inward, contemplate. So meditation is one. It could
Great.
be journaling, for example. But journaling, that's not just like randomly writing, but really be present with writing,
Yes.
right? So any kind of contemplative practice as a vehicle. So practicing curiosity. So I'll give you an example. If you're practicing meditation, but just noticing the breath, you're not just noticing inward inhale, in breath, out breath. You're noticing the quality of each and every single breath,
Mm.
the length of the inhale compared to the length of the out breath. The temperature, the texture.
Mm.
It's every single breath that we have is so dynamic. It's so rich.